Roger Wilkins, a professor locally here at George Mason University, had this to say about you in 1990. In my view, Shelby Steele does not have the intellectual candle power to merit the attention he gets. I do not say black people are without fault or that there is not a lot of effort required on our part to move us out of our predicaments, but our fundamental problem is not in our fears or uncertainties or defensiveness. Our fundamental problem is that we live in a racist society that's tilted against us.
Mr. Wilkins, like all of my critics, have only one thing to do, to go back and worship at the church of racism. They never answer any of the arguments I make or any of the criticisms I make. They just go back and say, this guy's crazy because he's not a true believer. In the dream deferred, I talk about this in some detail. The idea that we are still primarily victims of racism is a religion among certain segments of the black community, particularly the black leadership, which has all of its power and all of its wealth, particularly its wealth, invested in the idea that we are victims of racism. So here comes somebody like Shelby Steele, I can name many others, who says that this is not our #1 problem, it's maybe 15th on the list of problems. I'm taking food out of their mouth, food off their table. I'm saying to whites that you're stupid, you're crazy for giving these jokers money, and I mean it. You're not getting anything from it. And one of the reasons that it's so corrupt is that when corporations give money to the NAACP, the civil rights leadership, they never even evaluate in any serious way what these organizations do. Why haven't they really made an inroad against poverty? They don't do anything but sit there and take the money. So somebody like me sort of shines a light on the whole sham, and so it's not surprising that the Roger Wilkins of the world would if people followed my line of thinking, he'd be out of work. He'd have to make an honest living. All critics of blackness, all of them will do one thing and one thing only. They run back to the church of racism. They love racism. They roll around in racism as though it were money, and it very often is money. They love it. If white people stopped being racist, they wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't know who they are. And they just absolutely adore it and cannot get enough of it. If there's a racist event somewhere, they rent a jet plane and fly to it because they smell the power in it. They smell the money in it. These people love racism. Black people are terrified of freedom. And when you're terrified of freedom, when you don't feel comfortable, you don't know how to move, you don't know how to be successful, and there's all these white people around you who are successful and who do know how to deal with it, you hate freedom because it humiliates you. I think freedom can be seized. You can have it too. But you got to stop saying you're a victim of racism. You got to stop thinking that way. You have to begin to think like a master rather than a slave. You have to think that freedom is open to you too. This is a revolutionary idea in black America, which makes the point of how far behind we are. What I'm saying here, what Cosby's saying, what other black conservatives are saying, is not rocket science. It's just common sense applied to in a social way. Anybody can see these things. But today it is absolutely, I'm called a radical and so forth, and I am radical because most blacks still are at the altar of racism, which protects them from freedom. As long as they've got racism, as long as they can embrace it and hug it, then they don't have to be humiliated by freedom. The minute you give up racism, you will be, and you're not successful and you don't know what to do, you're going to be humiliated by freedom. So what we're doing, the people who screamed for centuries that we wanted to be free and finally became free, and now we have turned tail and run from it because it's humiliating. This is understandable. Every group that comes out of oppression goes through this. It's going on right now in the Islamic world. They too are running into some sort of identity madness, Islamic extremism, rather than because they don't know how to deal in freedom. They're doing exactly the same thing that we're doing. But the problem is not racism, the problem is freedom.